this week, like the fairy tale of Humpty Dumpty, the presidency of Joseph Robinette Biden had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men will never be able to put back together his failing presidency. You see, Joe Biden may have whistled past the political graveyard to become the 46th president of these United States, but this week the world learned, beyond a sliver of a doubt, that America most certainly does not have a commander-in-chief that is competent. 20 years and $2 billion of failed nation building in Afghanistan came completely undone in less than 10 days. It is a failure of such staggering proportions, even Biden's staunchest allies have had no choice but to acknowledge the obvious. This is an unmitigated disaster. And it's not because they didn't know about the threats. In fact, leaked intelligence memos confirm they knew Afghanistan was on the brink for months, all while getting on your television sets day after day, night after night, assuring us that everything would be okay. No, you see, the issue here was that they clearly had the wrong priorities. This is a profile in hubris, unlike perhaps anything we have seen in the history of American foreign policy. A botched sprint to the exits on an accelerated timeline in the name of political theater. Because this administration was more interested in the optics of Afghanistan on the eve of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 than they were in securing the outcomes that inspired our decision to go there in the first place. See, we went to Afghanistan to ensure that terrorism never had a beachhead from which to attack the Western world. We went to Afghanistan based on the calculation that we would fight the terrorists where they live so that they do not bring pain and suffering to America's front door. Which is why the words of Joe Biden in the wake of this crisis of leadership are as damning as they are infuriating. That America has no national interest in what occurs in Afghanistan moving forward.
Let's put this thing in perspective here. What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone?
Now, let us be very clear here. If Joe Biden does not understand why what happens in Afghanistan impacts America's national interest, he needs to go back and read the job description of what it truly means to be the leader of the free world. If he doesn't understand how the same guys with better weapons working for an organization with a new name, but the same objective as al-Qaeda, is not victory, but a giant leap backward, then he is clearly unfit for leadership. If the Taliban becomes the equivalent of what Hezbollah has become in Iraq and Syria, aka a certified, bona fide political party, a terrorist organization with the veil of legitimacy, briefcases by day, rocket launchers over their shoulders by night, I can assure you that is bad for every single American. If China does for the Taliban what it did for the Ayatollah in Iran, form a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year alliance and effectively become the largest underwriter for the terrorist threat to the Western civilization, I promise you, that doesn't just impact the national interests of the United States. It impacts the living and dying of free people all around the entire globe. Now, Joe Biden arrived at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue under a mission accomplished banner. The orange man was gone, America was back, and on his watch, the nation was destined to build back better, whatever that meant. And media was content to ignore the shortcomings of this president because their only requirement of him had already been accomplished: the eviction of Donald J. Trump. But you see, you can't ignore bodies falling off of cargo planes from 10,000 feet in the air. You can't ignore 40,000 Americans stranded in a nation overrun by terrorists with zero plan to get them home. And you can't ignore the reality that we are less safe from the threat of global terrorism than we were when Joseph Robinette Biden took his oath of office. If this incompetent display is what President Biden meant when he said we would build back better, then he hasn't simply failed his leadership test. He's become the chief architect of America's final fall from grace.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.